Welcome everybody to this session on formative assessment. I'm coming from my office, but then I am going to join the group over in the CTLE. Thank you for being here online, as well as in the room. I'll see those of you who are in the room briefly, but I'm very excited that our Assistant Director of Assessment, Pam Nelson, is going to be leading us in this conversation about formative assessment and all the wonderful things that we can do to support learning inside our classrooms, outside our classrooms, everywhere else. Before I leave to run over there, what I am going to do is throw a couple of links into the chat. I am going to put in the link to the Gaucho Assessment Day site. You'll be able to access all of the information from today by next week, recordings, slide decks, all of that. And then whenever you are done today or have done whatever you want to do with our recorded videos and other things, please just complete our Fall Assessment Day participation form so that not only you can get credit and a certificate if you want one, but you also will be able to give us some important feedback so that we can make these events better. And on that note, I will be passing this over to Pam. Thank you, Pam.
And Julie, I have a tech question. Do we have a way to have captioning?
Unfortunately, no. We don't have captioning in Zoom.
Okay.
It is available in Google Meet, but yeah, I didn't think about that aspect. Yeah, I didn't arrange for any formal captions. There will be captions in the recorded version, but we don't have access to live captions, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, that's unfortunately the answer for that one, Sally. I apologize for that in advance. Okay, so welcome everyone. Hopefully you are having a good day wherever you are. I see a number of you from a number of different places, even getting joined a few from Mesa and from our district community. So thank you very much for showing up. And we have two chemistry people over here. I'm going to still call you a chemistry, whether there it is, that are joining me in person with some other people trickling in as we go along. So, hopefully they brought food because we're going to make you guys online just super jealous. We have snacks out the wazoo and Julie made her brownies. So you must have brownies. If you come over here, if you are sitting in your office right now, this is your encouragement to get up and come over and eat brownies. But all right, so what we're here to do today is our formative assessment discussion. And what we have been doing here on campus is we have at the college been having a variety of different discussions about different forms of assessment, and formative has come up in a number of spaces as something that faculty have been doing, since the Socratic method, basically. And we're trying to figure out how and where that fits into what Julie would call the big A of assessment. And that being that the national community and HLC and all of the people involved in that want a very specific set of conditions to be resolved with respect to how you assess change over time and what you change after that. And where I have been a huge fan of formative assessment for the 23 years I've been leading assessment on the campus one way or the other. And so we are bringing the wheel back around, or as you will see, the gear back around to try to incorporate this in some of our discussions. And I would welcome any of you to add questions or comments on the chat as you're working along. And please let me know, raise your hand, yell and scream, do whatever you need to ask questions as we go along. And then we'll have a big portion of this is going to be for discussion between all of us about it. So we'll get to that. So let's actually talk about some things. So for those of you that are new and incorporating this information in your toolbox, what is formative assessment? That is going to be, and I have to be two people, so don't let me make you dizzy here when I move around, because I hate it when people do that, and I forgot to turn my screen on. All right, so if you're on campus, hopefully you have done the assessment course on campus, and you guys don't get to see the slides yet. And it says, this is a direct quote, formative assessment occurs before or during the learning process. That is considerably different from what we would consider summative assessment, which is at the end of the process. So formative assessment occurs while you are actively leading a discussion, presenting a material, going through and doing a particular topic, and allows you to ask questions that give you direct and immediate feedback about whatever you're discussing, which is why I'm a big fan of it. It allows you to, for instance, I'm in geology. So Julie introduced me as the assistant director, but my primary purpose here is teaching geology in the physical science department. So we may have a assignment or something like that that involves the classification of rocks or minerals or something like that. And what formative assessment allows me to do is see during the process, as I've literally handed them out samples of the rocks or minerals, what the disconnects are, why something isn't in the right category, why something hasn't been put in the correct division of the various things that they're looking at for each one of them. And so I can actually directly put in the information that I need to at that time to be able to direct the student into a more appropriate direction. Now, that is probably something in that example that all of us do every single day, every time we're talking to a student in every way. And so we are utilizing that all the time. The only difference is trying to put that together and use that and incorporating it into, like I said, the sort of the big A of the big A of assessment. So what we want to do is see how those two fit together. When we're looking at formative assessment, what do we mean? This means that we are asking the students to share their learning in very simple ways that allows the students to have input and describe what they are, for lack of a better way of saying, understanding or not understanding at a given time, so that we can immediately turn around and use that. Many of the things that we use in assessment, things like pre and post tests, it allows us to see how the students have done over a long period of time and then apply it to the next cohort of students, because we see what the change was, what we want to do, and what we're going to do the next time. This allows us in a better way to see how we can change the environment or the material for the given group of students we're working with at that moment. And so it allows us to have a little bit faster turnaround. But we still can work with that to be able to apply it to, as we said, sort of the big A assessment as we go through here. Why are we doing it? Because it is going to be easier to see what the students are doing and be able to directly turn it around before it's too late to do anything for that particular group of students. So one of the ways that they sometimes describe that as formative assessment being right on time. It works within the cohort of the students you're working with at that time and allows you to adjust your instruction for the specific group of students that you're working with in that particular class or cohort of students. And that also allows you to follow the train of active learning. We've all heard for well over at least 2 decades that active learning is going to be something that improves the learning of the students in a given course. And many of the ways that you can do formative assessment puts the learning in the hands of the students, which helps them to incorporate the material much more effectively than the talking head that unfortunately you're experiencing right now. So we'll get to the active learning part of this pretty soon. So many more reasons. Who benefits? Obviously, in assessment, we're trying to benefit the students as our first and foremost, and getting them to improve their learning, and then for our purposes, unfortunately, to document it, because everybody needs something written down about certain things. But the students get to play a role in their learning. We get prompt feedback that allows us to turn something around quickly, and the interaction between those two also allows you to have a better chance of getting to know the students, and more interaction means more learning both from you and from them. And so that's our ultimate goal, is to get everyone on the same train to be able to learn well, learn efficiently, and then, of course, our little sideline to be able to document that change as part of our assessment practice. So this has been going on for a very long time. My actual introduction to assessment way back in the dark ages in 1993 was the Classroom Assessment Techniques by Thomas Angelo. And it has a whole bunch of very specific examples And I'm super excited. This sounds really dumb, but I'm super excited that there's going to be a third edition in May. So it's been a lot of years, but I'm super excited that they're going to put out a new one. It's going to update some of the terms, I'm sure, but it's still going to be the same process. And then a newer take on an old idea. Julie's going to talk a little bit more about this when she enters our equation here. But this is a book called Hitting Pause. And that allows us to be able to, we got echo who turned on.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. And this has a variety of pieces of information about the research of why this is all a good idea. But then all of the appendices are very similar to the Classroom Assessment Techniques book, where they give specific examples of how the assessment can be done, what kinds of assessment are successful in a given period of class. And the addition in this that obviously was not in the Classroom Assessment Techniques is they also have a variety of ways you can change it up for online instruction, which was a new component for me and definitely helpful in the COVID and post-COVID and medium COVID or wherever we are world at the moment. So just a couple of examples. Megan Kennedy here at the CTLE teaches an assessment course. It's less so offered because we have the online version that our assessment developers have put together, but this was taken directly from hers. And these are from the Classroom Assessment Techniques, and they have a different name in Hitting Pause, but they're in the exact same thing. One that I use a lot is the Think, Pair, Share. The students seem to be less intimidated by working with one person in the class than multiples. And so again, less intimidation, more communication, more success in getting them to do it. So you're asking some kind of a question, having their students think about it together, write a joint answer, and then either present it or review it or verify it with what you talk about. It depends on how much time you have in the class to be able to cover that, but it'll depend, how you're using it, and every discipline uses things a little bit differently. The other one is clearest point or muddiest point. I do this a lot online, and sometimes I even do it as an extra credit on a quiz to ask what they understood the most clearly and or what they didn't understand and need more clarification. This is a good one to do on quizzes, in my opinion, because if they are not willing to raise their hand in class or not willing to send a separate message to you during the online class, you can get some feedback and then obviously put some more time into that before you get to a bigger picture test or something like that. And in some cases, I do this as a message that I send out as an inbox message, simply because I can see that there's differences of understanding, and especially in our quote unquote new world, some people are not able or willing to be as socially interactive as they might once were. And so I have to reach out in different ways. The minute paper is a good example of something that a peer of mine has used both for little a and big A assessment. The minute paper is asking your students at the end of a lesson or lecture, or however you've divided your class, to answer a question about the material that's covered. It can be, like they say, an index card, a half sheet of paper. I've had people do it as just a couple of sentences, however you want to do it. Something that is potentially one of the things I've had them do is summarize the lecture, see if they can tell me what the information of that class was in 2 or 3 sentences, see if they hit the high points. And a peer of mine, what they have done is trace that over time to see if their writing improves. The ability to incorporate the information and be able to translate it into a smaller number of sentences is something that is obviously a portion of the critical thinking concept, and also the one of our ILOs for writing competencies. So it allows you to view change over time in addition to an individual thing on the concept that they're writing the minute paper about, put those two together. And another one, background knowledge probe. This is one I use for climate change when I teach climate change. Obviously climate change comes with a lot of information from a million different sources, some of which are scientific, some of which are not, which means that students in my class are coming in with a wide variety of previously formed opinions and or knowledge on the subject. And so what I have them do with this is I have them summarize what they know about climate change, and if they can, what their source is for that information. And you would be amazed how many people I get that say my parents, which that isn't a scientific source, but let's just go with it. And then I have them do it after we go through all of the information and see what's changed and make them identify if or what has changed, which is also an ability to think critically about their own previous knowledge and allow them to put that together. And in the Big A assessment, what I do for that is take the whole class together rather than an individual student and see where they are. I'm looking at where the entire class starts and where the entire class ends, and hopefully seeing a change. I am very happy that the before probes are getting more and more correct over time. So thankfully, I'm not getting as many misconceptions in those initial ones as I might have once, but that's actually another piece of the information of seeing what's happening in each one of these. So what can you do? You can put all of these together and use them for the big picture. You can obviously, and we obviously do, use them as a one and done all the time, and we don't take the pause to write it down and make sure we document it and fill out a form and all that. But when we put those together and we judge the change that has happened over time for the students' perceptions and or their knowledge, we can look at a more comprehensive viewpoint of what the students are capable of doing, their writing proficiency, how they can synthesize ideas, what they have done. Some people do these rather than written, they do it as a verbal. And more so, I have a son in high school, and COVID pretty much jacked up all of their ability to socially interact, especially in a classroom. And so looking at this and watching how or if they become more interpersonally connected. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold and I'm gonna start coughing. And just being able to present or express their information. So that's one of the ways that I have done it. And thankfully, I'm gonna cough while Julie's talking. Your turn.
All right. Oh,
Yep, I'll mute if I can figure it out.
oh, thanks.
Oh, see,
Oh,
don't trust me.
all right. Oh, and can you mute the other? Is the main one on too? Oh, it's. Yes. Trying to manage the hybrid is a little. Oh, turn your volume down too. All right. We're just figuring out managing all of the high flex things. But we're glad that all of you are here online. Yeah, I don't see this. Yeah, maybe they're coming up. Well, while she's doing that, I'll talk a little bit about this book that Pam mentioned, this Hitting Pause book. So it is really, really cool because it talks for a while about like why this is important to do. But then it has these appendices. I know you can't really see it, but it says, oh, great. So I'll do the slide in a minute, but it says like, what are things you might do at the start of a class that are pauses? And pauses really, what's a pause is a formative assessment, what are things you might do at the midpoint of your class and what are you going to do at the end of the class? So it breaks it up into 3 different sections based on when you might want to do this. But then for each one, it walks you through exactly what to do it. And I'll try to hold this up. I don't know if you can kind of see it, but there's all these check boxes. And what it does is it shows you in what settings would you do it. So small classroom, big classroom, online, one-on-one, whatever else. And it checks box, whatever that activity can be used for in terms of the setting. And then for characteristics, is this a physical movement activity? Is it metacognitive? Does it celebrate? Is it providing like a closing part? So you can go through all of these pauses and figure out exactly what it is that you might want. And then the other thing I like about it is it tells you exactly what to do. It may give some additional suggestions, but then for some of them, it gives like references down at the bottom where you can actually see the research that supports the work. Anyway, so really cool book. But back to what Pam was talking about was, how do we see formative assessment in here? And So CART, of course, wants to support all kinds of assessment because assessment for us is simply about learning improvement. And if you are improving learning in whatever situations you're in, that's great, keep doing it. Our assessment developers can help with any kind of assessment. They don't have to just help with like the formal reporting type of thing. If you want to say, I want to brainstorm some ideas for assessment, you can come to our assessment developers, Karen and Roxanne. You can come to the CTLE. Now, in the context of deciding what to report on, we really like, so if you were doing a formal report, my only caveat is that we really want you thinking about what are the learning outcomes that are critical to students being successful beyond your class. And so from the context of writing a report, you may not be using formative assessment as much in that process because we want like the big impact stuff in the reporting. But you could maybe use multiple formative assessments, could be valuable. So formative assessment might work into that process. And then, or you might say, well, the intervention I need to do to improve student learning is going to be through formative assessment. Maybe I need to add more formative assessment because I'm not showing that students really are getting it before I'm giving them the test or the project or the more summative assessment. So hopefully that gives just a little bit of context about how all of that fits in here. And now what we want to do, Pam, right, is we're going to switch it over to letting anyone who wants to share ideas for formative assessment and what they want, what they're thinking, or or you can share what your needs are and we can brainstorm solutions for you. But anyway, Pam, what's next?
Okay, so hopefully you got some interesting information from that. And what I would love to see is and most importantly, what questions do you have? And then as I started the conversation, I said, all of us have been doing this forever. So this is not something that is new. This is not something unusual. It's the only question is, how often are you using it? What way are you using it? Is it something you eventually use to document the material in your assessment work or any other kind of information or questions that you have? So please feel free to jump in here and we can throw information in as we go along. I'm going to save these slides up to the assessment day website. Well, I'm going to save them. Julie's going to upload them. Let's be honest. And you can access any of these later as you go along if you are interested in doing so. Okay. I'll do this. Or I can have Karen.
Do you want me to go run it?
Yeah, haha.
Wait, so do you want to unmute yours and talk?
Yeah. Yep, it's unmuted. It's also loud. Okay. I'm going to be honest, I have never done this whole PyFlex thing before, so that's why I'm kind of off on a given path. I can run my computer like nobody's business, but having multiple computers in multiple places, a little out of my wheelhouse. So right here, I'm learning something to do increase active learning if I bring one of my classes over here. See how we learn and assess our stuff? So what feedback, questions, or whatever else do you guys have? I have not been following the chat while I was talking, I will be honest.
I have something. So I teach nutrition, and you said somewhere like asking people kind of like what they already know is fun, because then we can, it helps, like there's a lot of myths that can be dispelled as well. And that way I can see, okay, this is why carbohydrates are so confusing or whatever it might be. I also use Kahoot, which they like to compete, to kind of see where they're at. And then I focus on the things where people missed a lot of those questions.
Right, I use Kahoot as well because we don't have clickers in our area, at least yet. So that's something helpful. And they do seem to, even online, Kahoot seems to be a really big thing online. When I put it in my online classes, it gets really competitive and I have people like complete it 12 times to be able to make sure they're number one. So it is definitely something there. And then pulling that data is a formative assessment.
I didn't even know or think of doing it online. So that's a new idea.
Yeah, they love it. And I give them a little if it's, if you're in the top 3, you might get a surprise, and then they get 1 point, which of course, how much difference does that make in their final grade? But they are so, so happy. What is? Pear Deck. I
And
don't.
Canvas Studio, you can embed questions.
Canvas Studio and Pear Deck. So Canvas Studio is something everybody that's online is not GCC right now. So who in the district has Canvas Studio?
Oh, yeah, that's one beta test.
So I'm not sure if all the campuses have Canvas Studio right now. It's something relatively new to GCC that they've been teaching a lot on, which is really good. And I have never heard of Pear Deck, so Julie will have to step in to explain any of that if that's the case.
So I can't really talk about Pear Deck because I don't use it, but I've seen people use it. And it's really cool. So check it out. But anyway, but yes, Edward's got his hand up. So let's go to him since I'm not helpful.
Well, good afternoon, and I really appreciate the conversation today. My name is Edward James from the Department of Social Work. I have used the 1-minute paper assessments before, especially as I am facilitating a discussion centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, because so many of my students, and I really encourage the dialogue, but so many of my students come to class with a value system that has come from their socialization, and their value systems is really going to influence the way that they are interacting with clients and the whole sense of the delivery of services. So I just wanted to be able to share that the 1-minute paper has been of value, and especially when we're talking about a value-based approach to a particular subject area. And I appreciate the conversation.
I'm muted. What kind of questions, I'm curious, would you ask in those papers to get at a value system? That's obviously outside of my geology wheelhouse.
I will ask questions such as their socialization. When was the unknown caller? I'm sorry. Sorry about that. It was the first time that they had an interaction with someone from a diverse background. What was their response to that individual? And it really comes to language, and it really comes from the way that they were socialized from their families or those adults. Language that they may use, just as an example, I had a student a couple of semesters ago that was doing a presentation in class, and in the middle of its presentation, he talked about having an interaction with that colored man next door. Well, I had to stop the class so we could have some dialogue around it. And he said, well, that's a language that my father uses, my grandfather uses, and everyone else in the neighborhood uses. So I thought that it was okay. But if he uses that type of language in a social work interaction with a client, then there's going to be a very different reaction that the client's going to have. And the delivery of services the sense of the delivery of services will certainly not go anywhere.
That's very interesting. That's really cool. I'm reading a separate book for our CART meeting this afternoon, and it was talking about a variety of ways that people talk about different things. And I was curious as to how much students would be willing to share with one another about that. And so it's very good for me to hear that students are willing to have those kind of conversations, because again, outside of climate change and evolution, those are my only 2 debatable-ish topics that somebody else debates, obviously. Obviously, I have pretty strong opinions, but I don't have to have many of the other types of conversations directly inside my class. So that is definitely a very interesting piece for me to see that they're willing to reach out and think that through. That's great. And I like the 1-minute paper idea. to be able to, for you to see that if they aren't willing to speak directly up and then bring it up as a more neutral topic to the whole class without one person raising their hand. So that sounds like a great application.
And certainly students are willing to engage in the conversation only when I give that sense of their permission that everybody has their own value systems, that we talk about lenses. Everybody comes to the class with their own lenses, and it's their lenses and it's not to say that one lens is inappropriate or another lens is not inappropriate. But if students know that their voices are valued and they have an opinion, and then I, as the professor, will allow that opinion, because many times learning takes place when students are uncomfortable, and that's okay. But having students to respect other opinions is also tremendously important. If you disagree with a person, you have a tendency, and certainly I encourage students to do this, you disagree with their thought and their philosophy and not disagree with them, the person. You gotta be able to separate the two.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay.
I just wanted to follow back up on what Edward's sharing, because one of the things that I think about there's a session later that I'm doing on equity and assessment. So some of these issues are kind of coming up in that situation. And one of the things that I like about this is how can we structure some of our formative assessments or our classes in general to increase a sense of belonging, so that students are willing to come to us. Because sometimes formative assessment is saying, how are things going? And, and hoping that students will tell you. And it sounds like in the class that we were just hearing about, students were very comfortable with those conversations, but in some classes that might not be the case. So I do think that one of the interesting pieces here is there can be a lot of non-assessment things that we're doing in our classes that promote student learning, because it gives students a comfort level to reach out and say, hey, I didn't understand this, or could you explain that more, which is formative, but requires the student coming to you as opposed to you going to the student and soliciting that information. So I think that was interesting. I'd love for anyone to follow up on that. I do want to also address Sally's item in the chat, where she's talking about, the different formative assessments. And then the question here at the end is documenting. So I think what's really important to note is you don't need to be documenting, other than for your own purposes, the assessment you're doing. Like if I'm in a physical classroom, I'm looking around and half the faces look confused, I don't have to document that. I need to respond to it in the context of that space. And so, oh, okay. And Pam will jump in with a but. I mean, so you want to be kind of responding to it. I mean, you want to be documenting it internally or whatever, in the sense that you can act upon it. But this is that kind of big A, little a assessment. In the space of little a assessment, the assessment we're doing all the time, CART's not in that space. Big A assessment's not in that space. That is all you doing what you think is best in your classroom. The documentation might come in if you say, the problem I've been having in my classroom is this, quantitative literacy, and I'm going to do as an intervention all of these formative assessments to see if improvement occurs. And now I see that, students reported being very engaged in these formative assessments, and the test they gave at the end shows improved learning. That would be documentation. But that's in the space of like your formal course assessment report. So much of what we do, especially in the space of formative assessment, does not need to be documented, except for whatever Pam is going to say right now.
So let's see if I can get everything working again. This is like testing my skills here. So my answer as well, you were saying the big A and the documentation. One of the things that I have encouraged over time, which is part of why this formative discussion came back up, is that many of my peers, especially in the sciences, take assessment as I need to gather this data and I need to statistically analyze it and I need to see if it's statistically relevant. I only have this many students. Okay, I have to accumulate over 17 semesters because I have one class that's 24 and only offered every other semester, and make it super complicated and then never report on it. And so my feeling is, for instance, using Sally's example, something that I would look at as a formative assessment to turn into that big A assessment, and somewhat what Julie referred to as well, is taking a look at how it changes over time. Really, it's just making it a bigger picture. So even within that same cohort of students, and it's in her example, it's giving them a quantitative component that is randomizing a number for them to have to do the calculation over and over again, essentially with different numbers. You would be able to see in your discipline that the first several times, and I believe within the system, because I know a little bit about what Sally's amazing. She has designed a bunch of her own programming. It's if you ever want to talk about designing science programming, she's the girl to talk to. But anyway, you can probably trace where the errors were at the beginning and how those errors go away as they do it multiple times. And or you could trace how many times it took them to get it right the next time you did something similar to see if their skills are improving. Yes, it's a little bit more, well, a lot more qualitative than T-square and statistical analysis, but it is allowing a progression and a analysis of skills. Now, if you wanted to make a summative sort of a capstone question that is very similar to those, I suspect you have something like that on the test that says after you've done it all these practice times, here's one that counts for higher stakes. Then you can see over time, are they getting better and better at doing that, given that you're giving them more practice in that formative space. So there's a myriad of different ways that you can essentially connect the dots. And that's where, well, I happen to be Sally's department assessment coordinator, but that's where we could work on to put the form together. But that's another place that the assessment coordinators and the assessment developers can help you write it up or designate the steps you're doing to be able to put it into the nice little happy slots that we want it to be on that form. But really, my opinion is using the formative assessment gives me more rapid data. I appreciate doing the ILOs and the gen eds to come, but I have to wait till the next semester to get that data back, and sometimes 2 semesters again to make it statistically relevant, blah, 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 blah. And so my formative, that's where I would fall with that formative statement. Sally, does that answer your question? I hope. You can chat or whatever. Yes, mostly. Can I help any more directly? Or do you want to talk about it one-to-one? She's direct chatting me. You're not saying it. We will talk one-to-one. Okay. So who else and where else do we have that needs feedback or questions? Or I'm liking hearing some of your examples. I learned a lot from Edwards, for instance. You can't have nothing to say.
I'm making space.
Okay. Who all
I can talk
is
about
in the
it.
other room? Oh, I can't see you clearly enough. Okay. Yep. Yep.
Just a quick comment. I was working with a faculty member recently and we were talking about formative assessment. And I wanted to provide some examples other than just kind of directing the CTLE. And so basically I went online and started looking for things, and lo and behold, the Arizona Education Department has a curated list of, I think, 56 formative assessment methodologies. So if you Google azed.com, and I can probably provide the link for you, but it's a curated list of 56 formative assessments strategies, and some of them are pretty cool. A lot of them are we're already using, and some of that I'd never heard before, and I suspect that some of them are probably in that book too, which I'm going to have to pick up.
That's really cool. And I'll add, speaking on that topic, as I walk around. Oh, we're awesome here in this room. You're missing out not being in this room. Anyway, not really. But yeah, like you might also look to see if your disciplinary, your discipline area has resources. So psychology has intense teaching resources around assignments and assessments. So there may be teaching societies in your disciplinary areas that could provide this information as well. But yeah, I'm like Pam, I'm nosy. Like my best things are when I steal ideas from everybody else. So I want to know what ideas here. No, I like steal better. Let me share one actually. I'll share one really quick and the rest of you can think about which ones you want to share. I was doing an observation of David Boninger, and he had taught live online during the pandemic, and he was back in the in-person classroom, and he loved the chat feature like here, where, because he felt like more students participated. And he said, how can I do chat low tech with my in-person students? And so what he did is we bought him note cards, and he hands out note cards. And then throughout the class, he will stop and like ask a formative assessment question. We'll summarize this. What do you think of that? And he makes them write it down. And he notices a couple different things because they write it down, and they're all having to write it down on their note card. Once he then says, all right, who wants to share? He finds way more students share because they've taken the time to write it down. So it's not just necessarily the more vocal students. And then at the end of the class, he says, write your name on it. And they hand it in, and he uses it basically as the 1-minute paper to see how accurately they got the information. So then he can go back and address it next time. So it is super easy, and he doesn't necessarily do it every class period, but it really was a great way of mimicking some of the features we had, in this like online space, but with the in-person students.
Okay. And speaker, knock yourself out.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I was just thinking with Julie's example, I just this semester have gone back to in-person teaching, and there's some things that I picked up in my live online experimental moments that I wanted to recreate. And one of them is I loved the polling feature of WebEx. And not that I didn't use like poll everywhere and other things before, but now in my in-person class on the first time we meet of the week, I have like a poll everywhere that asks them to ask me a question about that week's assignments, because I asked them to like kind of preview what's coming up. So they either have to ask me a question, or if they don't have a question, they're not allowed to put, I don't have a question. They have to summarize what the expectation is. And I tell them, and I explain to them why, right? Because of course, even though I say that, I still get a couple, no questions, don't feel good. Or I get, I plan to do this week. And it's like, no. I want you to tell me what you think I want you to do.
Yeah.
And what it's become is this really nice entry point for class, because if they have questions, those kind of guide some of the formative pieces of what they're needing help with. Or if they have all summarized something like bananas, then I can be like, okay, so we are having a communication issue right here. Let's fix it in the moment, in that time. And it's been a really nice way of sort of keeping, and it also is a great way to, it's kind of from my K-12 days of bell work. It sort of feels like that sort of nice transition into the start of class. I think one of the ways I like to think of formative assessment is as a transition. I think a lot of times as higher ed educators, we don't always have that pedagogical background or that really strong teaching background to recognize or understand transition time. The way that, especially like our early childhood teachers, they really understand if you have to get a 2-year-old to go from point A to point B, you've really got to think about how to do it. And so formative assessment is one of those ways that you can sort of pause in the moment, get a sort of check for understanding, and transition into the next piece. And so that was my other thought. And now I'll shut up and go back to making space.
Karen and I have a long-standing thing of she and I talk too much and tend to keep other people from speaking. So we have to keep each other in check. That's where this little thing is going on over here. I love you too. I told the people online they were missing out on the brownies, so we're sending brownie vibes. Since you can't be here to have the brownies, here's your virtual brownie. Yeah. Karen and I'll take it for the team and have another one for you. So what else do we have? Oh, we're giving space. You have to take the space. And I have to write up what you said later because my brain, yeah. What else do we have online?
Yeah, maybe if everybody can just put into chat, like one formative assessment they do. It could be something that we've already talked about, or even a tool that they use. Right. Tell us one formative thing you did. Anything.
I would be interested in knowing what disciplines some of these people are in, because I unfortunately, and I apologize, do not know some of you from the list.
If you want to mute, I'll share one.
I will attempt to do so.
So I'll give another one from an observation that I was in, and then, yeah, like so if you're in this meeting, or if you're in a meeting room, that's not this meeting, I would love to know who all is here. I know I appreciate Edward jumping in and kind of telling us who he is. There's some names I don't recognize, which makes me so beyond thrilled. But if you can just tell us who you are, even if we know who you are, other people may not know who you are. So put your name and maybe your discipline in there. And then the task upcoming in our final few minutes, we would love for you to just tell us one formative assessment that you do. It could be something we've already talked about. But here was one you might like. Again, this isn't for in-person classes. I was in Marianne Duggan's class, her observation earlier this week. And she's an educational psychologist, came out of K-12. Really, really, really good. If you ever have the chance, you want to watch someone who's just a phenomenal teacher, Marianne Duggan. Anyway, so she wanted students, they had done some individual brainstorming, then she wanted them to share. So instead of musical chairs, they played musical pairs. They all stood up. She played a song, and when the song stopped, they had to pair up whoever was closest to them and share the information from the brainstorming worksheet they had already done. And the class was positive psychology. They were talking about happiness. So she was playing Pharrell Williams' Happy as they walked around the room. And I had never heard of musical pairs before. And yay for Sally. I see that. Oh, it's our friends from Child and Family Studies. I was trying to figure out who you are. You're too small on my screen. Let me tell you, formative assessment with the little ones next Monday, Children's Literacy Parade, 9 to 9:30. We got an awesome book from psychology. We're ready to compete. Oh, now, okay, so I was talking to Karen about like psychology upping its game. We not only are coming with our book, but we are donating copies of the book to the literacy or to the children's center so the kids can read them later, or with their teachers. And so I shared this with Karen, and Karen is now up the game because she got one of the copies of her book in Spanish. So I might need to go find a copy of our book in Spanish. So a formative assessment can happen anywhere from our students here in college all the way down to those little ones in our children's center.
What's geology bringing? We heard geology rocks. We were just wondering what
I'm
they
going
were
to give
say.
a shout out to Sally and Keith in astronomy. They have, how I put on that slide, the doing assessment before assessment was cool. Both of them have been really amazing in doing both formative and even more so summative, really spectacular assessments. So in case I don't say that enough to their faces, I am very grateful to have them in our department and doing as good a work as they do. To pat yourselves on the back. I won't come over and hug you in the department while I'm coughing, so you'll have to wait. Plus Sally lets me vent about other things, so it's all good. Okay. Yep, we've got 3 minutes left. I'm gonna start being that person because I do not know who Tevis is or Jackie or, well, I think I've met Roxana. Oh, Sally says she's working from home, so I'll have to wait till tomorrow to give her a hug. I didn't see her. Nope. Gina is a department assessment coordinator. Apparently I can't see her, but and Shannon is too. Shannon's been doing some really great work over in her department. Look, and her CFS people are nodding. Okay. I've lost the chat entirely. So here, I'm gonna hand you over to.
All right, Pam lost the chat. So thank you, Jackie, for sharing your Socrative. Yeah, I haven't used Socrative, but it sounds like it's a pretty cool tool. Exit tickets, of course, are really nice, as kind of that 1-minute paper ideas. You're going out the room. Roxana is sharing. Yay. So if you want to know about Pear Deck, now we know you can go to Roxana because I don't. Yes, Pear Deck. Oh, and Jackie put in the Socrative link. I'll put all of this into our information when I put it up on Facebook, or not Facebook, Gaucho, wherever I'm going to put it. See Think Wonder came out instead of like Think Pair Share. See Think Wonder. I like that. And then okay, Jennifer Lane. They got a list of things from Jennifer Lane. So yeah, we'll grab all of these resources. I'm sure the CTLE has a ton of them too. But sometimes when you're just feeling stuck, it's nice to get some new ideas. But again, I got to do another plug. Ask your department chair to buy you this book. It's not very expensive. It is really cool. Yes, then classroom assessment techniques when it comes out in May. All right.
I saved the chat, so hopefully that will also.
Excellent.
I don't know where it saved to, but I saved the chat.
Got it. Yes, it's saving on my computer too. All right. Is there anything? We're so excited. I will tell you, we've had just a great fall assessment day so far. Lots of people coming. Love it, love it, love it. Make sure that you do the participation link or do the participation form at some point when you are done. I don't have access to it easily right here on my computer, but it's in the chat and you can get it on Gaucho. You all can do that. And then feel free to join us later. We are going to have to head out of this one because we've got to get to our CART meeting, but there is a session on equity and assessment this afternoon, a little bit about ILO assessment. And then we close our day up with our suite assessment success stories with 3 of our fellow faculty sharing how they did assessment in a successful way. So I want to thank you. Pam put the link in. I want to thank Pam Nelson for organizing and advocating for formative assessment. This has been wonderful. And for all of you who came and those who are in the room, there are a few of us in the room. I don't know if you can see it. There's all the food over there in the room. Anyway, thank you all very much and reach out anytime to any of us and have a great day.
Thank you very much.